Few foods have the power to comfort and soothe like soup. Such a comfort food classic to turn to in case of illness or a really cold day. I'm Cindy Walker with K-State Research and Extension SNAP Education, and today I'm going to show you how to make a homemade version of a classic chicken noodle soup without a can. And you're going to love the fresh homemade flavor, and this is a very affordable way to show your family some love. The first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to make our broth base ourselves. So in the pot, I have 2 cups of water, and then I also have the leafy portion of some celery. And to that, I'm going to add the chicken. Now, this is really simple because we needed to cook the chicken for our soup anyway. So why not make our own broth? That's going to save us a lot of money. And homemade broth is going to have a lot less sodium, so it will be very healthy. And it's also going to just have a better flavor than something that's been sitting in a can. Now, you'll notice I am leaving the skin on, and these are actually bone-in chicken thighs. So I have 4 bone-in chicken thighs. And anytime that you're making broth, you really need the skin and the bones to really get the flavor. Now that we've added our chicken, we're going to add our vegetables that we've already prepared. And so I have half of an onion quartered. Again, you can dice those if you prefer to leave them in your soup, but these are just going to flavor our broth. We have 3 carrots that have been washed, peeled, and chopped. And then we have 2 stalks of celery that have been washed and chopped, and we're adding those to the leaves. You can always just use leaves to flavor your broth, especially if you prefer not to have the celery in the soup. That's a really great way to save. You can just freeze the leafy portion of a stalk of celery sometime when you have it, and then when you want to make soup, you can just pull that out to flavor your broth. And then to that, I'm going to add ½ teaspoon of salt and ½ teaspoon of pepper. Now, sometimes I might also add a little bit of garlic powder to it, but you don't need it. And then that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to put this on the stove top. I'm going to bring it to a boil, reduce it to a simmer, and then cook it until the chicken thighs are done, which will probably take 20 to 30 minutes. All right, I'm just gonna check the temperature on our chicken to make sure it's reached at least 165 degrees. And yep, it is done. So remember, it can be over 165 degrees, just not under. Now that our chicken is done, I'm going to go ahead and remove it from the soup and set it out. It's going to need to cool for a while before it is cool enough to handle safely. So I'm going to pull that out, and I'm just going to set it on the cutting board. I'm just using a slotted spoon. You could also use tongs or fork. Now that the chicken skin has contributed some of that flavor and the richness to the broth, we'll be able to just remove that when it's cool enough to handle. All right, I'm just fishing out the celery leaves and the onions. They've already contributed their nice flavor to the soup. And again, if you like to eat the onion in your soup, just dice it and you can skip this step. All right, now these chicken thighs have had a chance to cool, so I can touch them and see that I'm not going to burn myself. Sometimes when I'm making chicken noodle soup, I get in a hurry and I burn myself because I start deboning the chicken before it's at a safe temperature. So you wanna make sure you let it cool. The first thing that I'm going to do is pull off the skin that has contributed its flavor and richness to the broth already. And then the next thing that I'm going to do after I've got my skin off is I'm just going to use this fork and try to pull off large sections of meat off the bone. And then I can set the bones aside, and then I'll be able to switch to using my knife so that I can cut it up and get nice chunks. Just gonna finish pulling all of the meat off the bone here. All right, and now that we have all of this meat, I'm just going to chop the chicken. Now, this is going to come down to a personal preference, how large you like those pieces. I'm just using my other hand to kind of help add a little pressure to that knife blade. So I'm keeping my fingers flat. You never want to wrap your hand around a knife blade. And then I'm just going to trim up any pieces that I find that maybe have something that isn't really appealing in the soup. So we have our chicken deboned and we have our broth has been brought to a boil. So I'm just going to add the chicken back to the broth. And to that, I'm going to add, it's half a package of egg noodles. It's about 5 cups. All right, now that's going to return to a boil. Since I'm using packaged noodles, they say to cook them for 7 to 8 minutes. So once it returns to a boil, I'll let that go for 7 to 8 minutes until the noodles are done. Now, some other options in terms of noodles, you could use any dried pasta that you wanted to. It doesn't have to be egg noodles. Sometimes there are homemade noodles that you can buy either dried or frozen at the grocery store, so those would be fine. All right, so I'm going to let those cook for a little while. I'm gonna probably stir them a couple of times during that to make sure nothing's sticking to the bottom. And then we'll be ready to put it in a bowl. So a little tip to add some extra seasoning and enhance the flavors when you've made your own homemade broth is to add some chicken bouillon. Now, I'm not going to add the full amount as if I were making broth from just the bouillon, but I'm gonna add, this is about 4 cubes, so it would be what you would add to 4 cups of water. And I'm just going to add those to the soup and go ahead and stir them in. And that's going to just kind of fortify, strengthen the chicken flavor that's already in there. They also have a little bit of saltiness that they're going to bring to the dish, so I won't have to add as much salt. So you can just kind of add those, make sure they get all dissolved in there, and then you'll be able to, don't be afraid to taste the soup again to make sure that you like the way that it's seasoned. So I'm going to just serve up a bowl here, a little stir with the ladle. Make sure we get some of those noodles, broth, and vegetables. I'm gonna get about 2 ladles full. This bowl's a little bit larger than a typical serving bowl would be, but it's clear so you can see the contents and all of that very steamy and fragrant goodness. All right, time to taste. That was such a comforting flavor. It takes me right back to my childhood. I can still remember my mother when she got out that soup pot and she had chicken noodle soup boiling on the stove. The whole entire house was filled with that wonderful fragrance. In the wintertime, it would steam up her kitchen window. And I just remember that. And this just brings me right back to that place. Such a warm and comforting flavor. The dimensions of the vegetables, you can just taste that extra love because we made that broth ourselves. Such a wonderful way to utilize an inexpensive protein like chicken thighs and bring together a comforting and satisfying, soothing meal for your family. I hope that you will be inspired by this to create a soup sometime soon.